This is the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast, episode 698, Feedback Tips for Blended and Online Learning with Matthew Johnson. Welcome to the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast, hosted by author, educator, speaker, and mom, the Cool Cat teacher, Vicki Davis. As you adapt to all the relational aspects of distance learning, feedback is an important one to consider. How can teachers give feedback frequently and in ways that help students learn? With all that's going on this fall, how are we expected to give quality, real-time feedback? Today's guest, Matthew Johnson, is a high school English language arts teacher from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and he's going to share feedback practices that are not only effective and efficient, but more meaningful and sustainable. Well, let's get right into the podcast. Enjoy!
Hey teachers, you can make it so much easier to post your notes to your online classroom with Whitebook. Stay tuned at the end of the show to learn how you can save big on this valuable tool. Today we're talking with Matthew Johnson. He's a high school English teacher. He's up in Michigan and teaching remotely, but he has also spent the last 10 years of his teaching career pursuing feedback practices that are effective and efficient. So, Matthew, we're going to talk about effective and efficient feedback practices for blended and online learning. Have your feedback thoughts changed as we've moved to blended and online, or what are those thoughts now?
Feedback in normal times is really important. Like how we respond to student work is a really big deal. But I found it to be an even bigger deal when it comes to online or blended learning, or really even in person with a mask or a plexiglass between you. And I think the reason for that is that if you kind of think about a school, it's normally like a really loud and lively place. At least mine is. You know, I've got the noise of 35 teenagers learning in like a 500 square foot room, and all the hundreds, if not thousands, of like little interactions that happen throughout the day, and also like all the nonverbal information, that information that comes from students' faces and their posture and how they hit the keys on their keyboard. And like I compare that to my reality now, which is my basement over Zoom, and all of that's gone. And that might not seem like such a big deal, like losing, the small hellos and the check-in and, the room noise. But, those are actually really important critical teaching space. That's where we do so much of the work of like getting to know students and learning who they are as people and their funds of knowledge. And that's key if we want to connect to them and relate our content and be culturally responsive. And that's also, those little interactions are where we show that we care. We remember that they're in the Nutcracker, that they won the Poetry Slam. And it's also where we establish a lot of our credibility, and we motivate students and we cultivate mindsets and beliefs. And so, without that, all those bridges, it's a really big deal. But there is one bridge that remains consistent, whether or not it's online or blended or in person in a mask. And that's, feedback, and kind of similar to like those stadiums that you see that are empty, where you can hear like every crack of the bat significantly louder. If feedback, I think, comes through even more, strongly and is even more important. And I think that it can carry a lot of the weight of those other interactions as well. And so I found that, feedback, it's not such that I look at it differently as it seems like it's even more important right now.
Well, I would agree with that because I'm in a face-to-face environment, but our words can get closer than we can because our words can get past the mask. Our words can get close to those kids right there on that screen. And I've seen it in my own room because, things right now are just not the same, even if you're face-to-face. I mean, my attendance is up. Kids want to be there. They're engaged. It's incredible from that perspective. But the distance, we're doing high air fives, air hugs, all these things. But I will tell you that in my classroom, I have found that when I leave that feedback as they're working and when I connect as they're working, it elicits such a response, almost like if I was standing over their shoulder, which I can't do as much now. And so you're absolutely correct. So what are some of those efficient, effective feedback practices as kids are writing and working?
So in terms of doing this effectively, you actually hit upon one of the most important ones, which is feedback has to be really regular. I think even more so now than we normally do it. I'm an English teacher, and I know for a long time, like the way that I handled feedback was kids would write an essay. I'd collect 150 plus essays. I would, spend the next 2 or 3 weeks spending way too much time going through all those essays, and then I'd give it back to them. And that meant that they were only really getting kind of feedback from me 2 or 3 times a semester, like at most. But the problem with that is that like research on feedback shows that feedback is the most effective when it comes really shortly after you do something. and when it comes in the formative stages, like when you're doing something, and when it's regular, when it happens a lot. And I think in this distance learning that we're all in, regular feedback is even more important because it kind of takes the place of those interactions that we normally have. So what we have to do is we have to think about feedback a little bit more broadly. We can't just think about feedback as like, this is just something we do on big papers and big tests. Like we need to find ways, and it's actually my book, Flash Feedback, that's where the title comes from, is we have to find ways to give feedback really quickly. And I like to think about like a basketball coach, because no basketball coach would ever watch a game and be like, I'll get back to you 3 weeks later, and do that like 2 or 3 times a year. Like that's not going to happen, right? So or 4 weeks later, once I've watched all the film, we can do this. Like, no, of course not, right? So what you do is basketball, they have a drill and you practice like one skill and they watch that and they give you real-time feedback. And we can do that as teachers. I can pick something like paraphrasing. My students always struggle with paraphrasing. Maybe they're working on something and I show them like a mentor text. I'm like, hey, take a look at how this paraphrasing is. Compare yours to that. Do some reflection. And then let's have like a 1-minute conversation. And you can do that. And that's real feedback. It's individual, but it's also rapid. You can do that in one class period. And so, really thinking about having feedback be a very regular part of the classroom is super important. I also think another key thing to think about this year is this idea that less is more. So there's like 40 years of scholarship that shows that like if I, as an English teacher, have a paper and I do like comment on everything, like 30 different things, every mistake, every thought I have, that overloads students. And we would never do that with a lesson. We'd never have 30 learning objectives. Like that would be absurd, but we do it on papers all the time. And the same is true for any subject area you can think of. But best practice is really actually much more efficient practice, which all of us need right now, is to just pick a few things and go deep on those. Because when you try and do 30 things, you talk in that weird English teacher shorthand, like you're like awkward, and things like that, as opposed to going deep and really learning it. And that's also what online teaching experts say. They say, like, keep it simple, slow it down. And so that's, really important. And then I think just humanizing feedback more. I've really been getting into audio feedback. And I came across a study that found that students were 3 times more likely to apply audio feedback than written because they couldn't misconstrue it. They couldn't look at it as like, he's criticizing me, when they heard my voice and I was really upbeat and like, hey, we're working on this. This is great. And so I think those are 3 things to really think about. This idea of regularity, this idea of less often being more, and then this idea of humanizing feedback.
So much we could dig into there. I know when I'm grading papers, for example, I always tell my students, I want the computer to do what it does best and me to do what I do best. And I'm a creative, and after I've checked a good couple papers, I'm going to miss all the commas. So I'll just run it through my Grammarly and say, hey, I see 40 mistakes in here. Did you run it through Grammarly, or did you run it through your grammar checker? Because you need to do that. I guess kind of like my college teacher did, and would grade the first paragraph and say, hey, I found this number of mistakes. You need to check them yourself. And I love the audio feedback. It's just so important. Now, the end of your book, the subtitle is, so it's Flash Feedback, Responding to Student Writing Better and Faster Without Burning Out. Okay, that's what teachers are worried about, but we need to do it. Like I even use memojis now to give feedback, and the kids love it. This cute little cartoon that looks like me. So how do we do this without burning out?
So the cool thing is it's actually a lot of those same ideas, right? And actually, I'll use your comma as an example. Like what I do with commas is, as opposed to going through every paper and marking every comma, which if you take that on scale of all the things you could talk about, which is kind of how English teachers are often taught, that you're sort of closer to like an editor, where you have to mark everything. I don't mark commas. Instead, what I do is I have something called a comma paper. But the only criteria is they have to use 20 commas, and every single one has to be correct. And they have to have all different types of commas. So they have compound conjunctions and lists and, extra information and all of those. And then when I give it feedback, all I do is I hit the Control Find button, and every comma lights up, and I just scan it. And I'm like, and I can do that in 30 seconds. And then I hand it back to them. And then instead of me making the changes for them, which again, taken on a scale of 150 students, takes a long time, I say, you have 2 commas that you need to go work on. And once you got that, you'll get credit for this. And it actually ends up just becoming a credit, no credit. And I like that too, because it also takes grades out of the equation. So the idea is really that, being really smart about our feedback time and taking everything that teachers used to just put into a final draft and spreading it out, which is much more effective from a learning standpoint. And it's much less like painful for us because as opposed to having that stack of papers that's like 6 inches, long, like wide with like those clips that are like made just for English teachers, which which is just brutal and burns out a lot of English teachers. You're having a lot of these, conversations during class. Like I'll actually look at those and grade them during class and get them back to the kids that class, which means I'm not going home with papers at night. And then when it comes to an essay, like you said, I'll do what I do best. I can focus on a few things. I can conference with the kids, and that's a lot of fun. That's not burnout. That's invigorating.
So as we finish up, fill in the blank. During this time, fall 2020, I hope we don't blank.
During this time, fall 2020, I hope we don't leave too many kids behind. I'm just terrified at how many kids might not be having their needs met.
And even teachers. It's not an easy time to be teaching, but it's probably the most important time to be teaching.
Yes.
So educators, feedback is so important. It's a way we can get past the mask. It's a way that we can, you hate to say get in their face, but literally you're getting right there into their eyes and reaching out and touching kids, for that old metaphor we used to have there, in just an important way with our feedback. So Matthew Johnson has written the book, Flash Feedback, Responding to Student Writing Better and Faster Without Burning Out. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you so much, Vicki. I really appreciate it.
If you use a paper flip chart, you know that after one use, you're done. Now more than ever, especially with many of us teaching from home, we have to be more efficient. Wipebook is an excellent solution for educators, no matter where you're teaching. You have to check out Wipebook Flip Chart at wipebook.com/CoolCatTeacher. That's WIPEBOOK.com/CoolCatTeacher. These flip charts make it so easy to snap a picture and upload it to your Google Drive or Dropbox for quick sharing with your students. And they are reusable dry erase surfaces, so you can use them again and again. Features like dark, easy-to-see borders and the Wipebook Scan app make it simple to use. So go to wipebook.com/CoolCatTeacher right now and receive 30% off your order. Wipebook Flipchart is a fantastic addition to your classroom teaching toolkit, especially if you're teaching from home.